This is lecture 19 and today we will discuss something about detonation first. For the first few minutes we will discuss the nature of detonation and when we can expect detonation, and this discussion will be a rather simple sort of discussion without going into the actual complexities of practical detonations. Practical detonations are typically 3-dimensional, whereas we did only a 1-dimensional analysis. So, very brief discussion on detonations, that is what we will do first, and then we will discuss deflagrations. Deflagrations means flames, and the first thing that we will discuss is laminar premixed flames. So, if you have a mixture of fuel and air, if you have a flame moving through it, or if you have a flame which is stabilized on a burner through which there is a flow rate of fuel air mixture, then we call it a premixed flame, and if the situation is laminar, we call it a laminar premixed flame. So, that is the easiest thing to discuss after the background that we have developed on detonation and deflagration. Flame is deflagration. Okay. So, to start with, a little bit about detonation. Now, detonation is actually a shock wave sustained by the energy released by combustion. It is actually a shock wave which is sustained by the energy released by combustion. The combustion process in turn also is initiated by the shock wave compression and the resulting high temperature. So, there is a shock wave which generates compression and resulting high temperatures, and that helps in initiating chemical reaction. And in turn, the chemical reaction zone, because reaction has been initiated, so the shock wave has produced the compression, produced high temperatures, that has helped ignite the mixture. So, there is a reaction zone there, and the reaction zone is releasing energy, and that energy in fact helps the shock wave. So, these two are acting together. The reaction zone is helping the shock wave by giving it energy, and the shock wave is generating compression and high temperature, so that reaction can easily happen. So, there is a simplified 1-dimensional structure of shock waves, and we can take a look at this. So, this is called a ZND structure, ZND detonation wave structure. Now, ZND are the initials of 3 people: Z for Zeldovich, N for von Neumann, and D for a person called Dühring. Zeldovich, von Neumann and Dühring. So, they based on their work, this detonation flame structure has been established. So, the detonation structure is like this. You have the axial distance plotted here, and you have some property ratios plotted on the y axis. And you will also see that there are some points marked, for example 1, 2 prime and 2. So, between 1 and 2 prime you have the shock wave. Okay. So, shock wave is typically very thin if it is of the order of a few molecular mean free paths. So, it is actually very thin, and between 2 prime and 2 you have a larger zone, a thicker zone. So, that is the chemical reaction zone. So, what is the shock wave doing? You see that there is a large increase of pressure. Pressure is this dashed line, P by P1. So, it reaches the maximum value around here. So, that is the contribution of the shock wave. After that, after the shock wave there is a decrease in pressure, but the pressure is still in the reaction zone also, the pressure is still much higher than the pressure on the unburnt side. Unburnt is 1, burnt is 2. We remember that from all our discussion so far. And you will also notice that apart from P by P1, P by P1 has been plotted here. In fact, P by P1 divided by 2 has been plotted here. Why? Because we want to fit everything in one plot. Okay. So, the value which you see here is about 20 something, slightly more than 20, but it is actually slightly more than 40, is not it, because we are dividing it by 2 and then plotting. So, this is more like 40, 42, whatever. And you also got temperature. So, there is an increase in temperature corresponding to this compression, increase in pressure because of the shock wave. So, there is an increase in temperature, but the temperature further increases because there is reaction happening in the reaction zone. And similarly, you can also see that you have because of effect of pressure and temperature, chemical reaction, etc. This is the profile of density. So, this is the unburned side, this is the burned side. So, the shock wave is in this zone, it leads the reaction zone. So, it is ahead of the reaction zone. Reaction zone is here, okay. The shock wave is before that. And as I said, the shock wave is generating these high pressures and temperatures, which will help the reaction to get ignited. So, it is helping the reaction zone, and the reaction zone is generating energy, which helps the shock wave to sustain itself. Okay. So, this is broadly the structure. Now, this is a one dimensional structure that you can see, because it has been plotted only as a function of the axial distance. The real detonations are three dimensional, they are not one dimensional, and there may be multiple shock waves which are interacting with one another. So, it is a much more complicated structure, but that is beyond the scope of what we are doing in this course. So, we will not get into that. Okay. So, that is one, that is the basic nature of detonation. We call it a ZND structure. Now, apart from that, it is good to also know, based on what we have seen, it is also good to know some values of various things for detonation and deflagration. So, what we have is a table. In fact, this is available in most books. It is available in Turns's book. It is available in the book called Principles of Combustion by Kenneth Kuo. And if you look at those books, these are typical values which are listed for detonation and deflagration. So, you can notice, for example, that P2 by P1, P2 is the burned side pressure, P1 is the unburned side pressure. P2 by P1 is approximately 1 for a deflagration, okay, slightly lower than 1, it is more like 0.98 for a deflagration. Now, do we understand this? Did we discuss this some time back? Did we discuss this maybe in the last lecture or the lecture before that? Yeah, so that is based on the curve that we had seen. We had seen the Rankine-Hugoniot curve, and we had seen that in the Rankine-Hugoniot curve, the deflagration part is on the lower side. So, that is actually practical deflagrations are more located slightly below C, point C, and yeah. So, this is the third region. So, if it is something like this, one here, we call this B, we call this C, call this L, we call this region region 3, okay, region 3. C is not a valid point because C gives a mass flux of 0, C gives a mass flux of 0, and practical deflagrations, these are flames. So, the subsonic wave disturbances, they move at small speeds, giving you small values of mass flux. So, the Rayleigh line corresponding to those will be more like this, slightly below C, okay. Probably you can't see it very well from the way I have drawn it, but let me try again, maybe some point like here. Okay. So, this will have a pressure value P2 which is slightly lower than P1. So, that is why P2 by P1 is more like 0.98. So, going back to what I was showing you, I said that P2 by P1 is very large for a detonation, and it is about 1, but slightly less than 1 for a deflagration. So, we kind of understand this. For detonation, we were actually making an assumption that P 2 by P 1 is much greater than 1 yesterday, because we wanted to develop some equation to calculate the detonation wave speed VW. So, for VW we developed an expression yesterday, and while deriving that expression we took P 2 by P 1 to be much greater than 1. That allowed us to write rho 2 by rho 1 as gamma plus 1 by gamma, correct. So, we did that simplification in the last class to get an expression for the detonation wave velocity. So, we know that P 2 by P 1 is expected to be much larger than 1. So, it is in the range of 13 to 55. Why do you have a range? You have a range because there are various kinds of mixtures, various equivalence ratios, various kinds of boundary conditions and things like that, but it is still much greater than 1. T 2 by T 1 is in the range 8 to 21 for detonation, for deflagration is 4 to 16, and density ratio is in detonation it is more than 1, in deflagration it is less than 1. Is that understandable from deflagration point of view? So, let us say you have a flame. So, again you can imagine again that same tube which I have been drawing, and think about that combustion wave with that speed VW. Now, think of it as a flame, right, as a deflagration. So, do you think that density on the burnt side, that is rho 2 divided by density on the unburnt side, should be less than 1? What do you think?
Yeah, for ideal gas you can understand rho equals to P by RT. So, P is almost of the same order. P is increasing by 4 to 16 times.
Okay. So, the answer is that for a deflagration P 2 by P 1 is almost equal to 1, slightly less than 1. Okay. So, almost the same. Now, density is P by R T, where R is the characteristic gas constant. Now, the characteristic gas constant will probably not change much between the unburnt and the burnt, correct, because the mixture molecular weight will not be drastically different, will not be, because in both the unburnt mixture as well as the burnt mixture it is actually a lot of nitrogen. Okay. So, similar to the molecular weight of nitrogen probably as a first approximation. So, the mixture molecular weights are not very different. So, it will depend on the temperature. So, the temperature is varying, temperature is increasing on the burnt side, temperature of the burnt side is high. So, if the temperature of the burnt side is high, the density on the burnt side will be lower, density of the burnt side will be lower. The unburnt side is colder, so it will have a higher density. So, that is why rho 2 by rho 1 is actually small for deflagration. And there are, of course, if we study this table in more detail, we will be able to explain all these things. We, for example, for detonation we are saying M2 equal to 1, this in fact we derived, okay, M2 equal to 1. We did not derive all these things, but this can be done with little bit of effort. Okay. So, this is about the comparison between detonation and deflagration. But one question, so we have seen the difference in parameter values between detonation and deflagration just now, and I had also told you that the detonation wave structure has this shock wave followed by a reaction zone. So, this we know, but then another question we did not answer, that is when do we get a detonation, when do we get a deflagration. And I have been telling you that our perspective, the set of equations, the analysis that we are doing is rather simplified. So, we do not really know very well, we will not have the tools very well to predict when we are going to have deflagration, when we have detonation. But at least one thing can be said, that if you have a tube with a fuel and mixture, and let us say this end is closed, this end is closed. So, this is blocked, and you give a spark or something to ignite a combustion wave. So, you get a combustion wave which will move. If you do that, then most likely it will become a detonation. Okay. If the tube is long, then it will move, maybe first it will not immediately become a detonation, it will move a bit as a deflagration, that is as a subsonic wave, but then it will start accelerating and then it will become a detonation. Contrast that to a situation like this, when this both the ends are open. Here this end was closed, this one is open. So, this is case 1, and in case 2 it's open on this side also, and you have ignited here and you have got this combustion wave which moves here. Now, this is unlikely to become a detonation. Okay. So, if this end is closed like in case 1, then you are producing burnt gases behind the combustion wave. So, the combustion wave is moving from here towards this side. As it moves, it is also generating burnt gases which have no place to escape. So, they do something like a piston effect on the combustion wave. Then the combustion wave has this tendency to accelerate. So, it was initially a deflagration. Talking about case 1, when you ignite, you get a combustion wave which is a deflagration, but because of this piston effect, because of the fact that you are generating burnt gases behind the combustion wave which have got no place to escape, because you have ignited at the side where it is closed. So, it accelerates and it will become a detonation wave. Okay. So, what happens is, it's this sort of, so we understand that it is actually dependent on the boundary condition. That is one thing we understand. The other point that we understand is that a deflagration can become a detonation. So, this is, in fact, this is known as DDT. DDT is deflagration to detonation transition. So, that is possible. Okay. But again, analysis of this is beyond our scope. Why am I telling you all this if we are not going to analyze this? Because this is still important to know. It is important to know that if you have a tube and if you are igniting at the closed end, you are likely to end up with a detonation, and you know that detonations can be dangerous also. Okay. They move very fast. So, that is all. Plus, the other point I want to mention is, this is like a thermal initiation of detonation. So, you start it in some way with a closed end and then you get a deflagration, then it becomes a detonation. There can be other situations when detonation can be generated by creating a blast wave or something, which in a mixture which will produce a detonation. So, that in that case it is not a, I mean it will start off very quickly as a detonation. It is not a thermal initiation when it is first a deflagration then a detonation. Okay. So, we will leave it there, because analysis of detonation is beyond the course, beyond the scope of this course. So, we will go to a topic which is a little easier to do in a first course in combustion. So, that is deflagration. We are doing deflagration now because we now understand that we have some background already about deflagration. At least we know that P2 by P1 is approximately 0.98, just below that point C. We also know that the combustion wave will propagate at subsonic speeds. We know this sort of information. So, we can again think of a fuel air mixture in which we have ignited and we got this combustion wave moving. So, this is VW, but now we are calling it a deflagration. So, we are saying that the boundary condition is such that we have a deflagration, we do not have a detonation. So, that makes it easier. Previously, in the Rankine-Hugoniot analysis that we had done, we said that okay, we do not know whether it is a deflagration or detonation. So, starting from point 1, which is the unbound condition, let us see what happens if we get a detonation, let us see what happens if we get a deflagration. Then we did that analysis. So, if the point 2 is on the detonation branch, then what happens? If point 2 is on the deflagration branch, then what happens? That is all we could do. Now, we are becoming more concrete, more specific about what we are actually trying to do. So, this is this combustion wave. Now, this is specifically a deflagration wave, okay, in the discussion that we are going to have now. So, it is a flame. So, this is now a flame. Let us call it a flame, deflagration is flame, and also since fuel and air are mixed together, we are calling it a premixed flame. And for the time being, we are also considering laminar premixed flame. So, we hope to have some discussion on turbulent premixed flames also later on in the semester. But as you can understand, turbulence is a difficult concept to understand. In our first course in combustion, understanding a lot about turbulent premixed flames will not be possible. So, our focus will be primarily on laminar premixed flames, but then some lectures, maybe a couple of lectures, maybe 3 lectures on turbulent premixed flames. Now, where do we get laminar premixed flames? Laminar premixed flames are less common than turbulent premixed flames. Do we know some examples of premixed flames now? We started the semester with some examples of flames. Okay. So, we have the Bunsen-Burner flame, which is laminar premixed flame. Do we know some example of a turbulent premixed flame? We took the example of an SI engine flame. Okay. Remember what I used to draw? We had discussed that. So, this is engine cylinder, piston, and you are giving a spark and you get this flame which is moving. Okay. So, this is a turbulent premixed flame. This is in the SI engine context. SI engine context. Why is the SI engine context important? Because in an SI engine we are mixing the fuel and air before we carry out combustion. So, fuel air mixture is what has come to the engine cylinder after probably an use of a carburetor or nowadays with the help of a fuel injection system. So, the fuel air mixture, in that we have this propagation of a premixed flame. We have discussed that quite a bit previously, that okay, back side of the flame, this is burnt mixture marked with red. Ahead of the flame, this is a colder mixture marked with blue, which is the unburnt mixture. Why is it turbulent? Because the engine conditions are such, piston geometry is such, the engine speed is such that the flow is actually turbulent. So, this flame has a highly corrugated, uneven kind of structure. So, I have mentioned all this before. So, this is just a recollection of what I mentioned in the first few lectures of this course. The laminar premixed flame will look much smoother, nicer. A turbulent premixed flame will look more violent, it has a more jagged structure, okay, uneven corrugated kind of structure. And we can also understand that turbulent premixed flames will consume mixture at a faster rate. Okay. The reason why we want to use turbulent premixed flames in actual combustion, let us say in combustion chambers or in engines, is that turbulent premixed flames have much higher rates of mass consumption of the mass of the mixture, much higher rates of consumption of the mass of the fuel and mixture than laminar premixed flames. Okay. So, from a practical point of view, turbulent premix flames are much more important than laminar premix flames. So, your question can be that why do we study laminar premix flames then? Why don't we study turbulent premix flames straight away? So, there is an obvious answer to that. The obvious answer is that if you don't know laminar premix flames, it will be much harder to straight away go to turbulent premix flames. So, that is one reason. The other reason is that there are some applications where laminar premix flames can also be important. For example, in gas ranges, in ovens, in some heating applications, in Bunsen burners of course, and in glass products manufacturing. So, if you are softening glass, then you use small flames, multiple flames maybe, small flames, these are used in industry. So, small flames used for heating some substances including glass to soften them and give a shape to that substance. So, your glass can be softened at a high temperature using a flame, and then glass can be given a shape. So, in glass products manufacturing also laminar premix flames are used. And if we understand laminar premix flames, there are some models of turbulent premix flames where laminar premix flames are used as building blocks. So, that is another reason why knowing laminar premix flames is actually a good idea. Now, we will go to some fundamental aspects of laminar premix flames. So, again going back to the similar kind of picture that I have been drawing, VW, combustion wave speed. Now, we have been writing rho 1 U1 equal to rho 2 U2. Okay. So, let us think about this. I am still using the same notations. Now, when is this valid? This is steady situation. Okay, steady situation. So, we got rho 1 U1 equal to rho 2 U2, and we are also talking about a one dimensional situation. Plus, this equation is written for an observer who is sitting on the combustion wave, correct? U's, that is U1 and U2, were the relative velocities. So, these are velocities of the gases with respect to the wave, correct? We had small v and we had small u. So, the u's U1 and U2 are in fact the relative velocities, relative with respect to the combustion wave front. So, in this case relative with respect to the flame front, because now we have a deflagration which we are also calling a flame. So, this is rho 1 U1 equal to rho 2 U2, and from this is from our previous analysis, same notations, okay, same notations, but we will change the notation a little bit, because we are now, if we follow notation in turns, so then we will write this as rho u v u equal to rho b v b. Rho u equal to rho u v u equal to rho b v b. So, instead of 1 and 2, we are writing u and b, u for unburnt, b for burnt, and we are also writing v, not u, and we are not writing 1 and 2, we are writing u and b. And the other thing that we will do is rho u v u will also write as rho u S L. So, this S L is actually a laminar burning velocity. V is still relative velocity. Now, burning velocity is actually the speed with which the unburnt mixture approaches the flame relative to the flame, normal to the flame. Okay. So, think about these notations again, compare it to what we previously used. What is SL similar to? In VW. SL is similar to VW, isn't it? Because VU was similar to U1, and remember U1 became equal to VW on the assumption that the mixture is quiescent, that the mixture, unburnt mixture, is really not moving much. So, SL is like that VW. SL is like that VW. So, this SL is in fact the velocity with which the unburnt mixture moves into the flame, normal to the flame, relative to the flame, correct?
So SL and VU is same.
SL and VU are same, yeah.
And VU is relative velocity with respect to?
VU is relative velocity of the unburnt mixture with respect to the combustion wave front, that is the flame.
And so it is more relevant only for the quiescent.
Yes. So, in case of quiescent, we wrote VU equal to SL. So, we can write this, and let us also remember that rho B is less than rho U, correct? Rho B is less than rho U. Is that okay? Where do I get this from? Again, we had this discussion few minutes back. We said that the temperature of the burnt gases is much higher, molecular weight of the burnt gas and the unburnt gas are similar. Pressure is almost the same between the unburnt mixture and the burnt mixture. So, if you look at this picture, this is the unburnt side and this is the burnt side, but the pressures are almost the same, almost the same. This pressure is slightly lower than this pressure, correct? Now, rho U by rho B for typical hydrocarbon air flames at atmospheric pressure, rho U by rho B is approximately equal to 7, all right. And we just wrote rho U VU equal to rho B VB. So, VB by VU is rho U by rho B, which is of the order of 7. And VU is like SL, so VB by SL is of the order of 7, correct?
The approximation 7 is for?
7 is for hydrocarbon, typical hydrocarbon air flames at atmospheric pressure. So, you can do this in your mind also. Rho U by rho B should be about 7, because it will depend on the burnt gas temperature and the unburnt gas temperature. What is the burnt gas temperature like? Maybe 2000, maybe slightly more than 2000. Okay. How do you know? Because even before coming to this discussion, you could calculate the expected burnt gas temperature if you assume adiabatic combustion. So, if you assume adiabatic combustion, if you assume that the burnt products are at equilibrium, then you can use that equilibrium calculator which we had spoken about. You can do some calculation with an equilibrium software, get a temperature, and we already know that such temperatures are of the order of 2000, 2100, 2200, 2300 Kelvin. Okay. And we are talking about typical hydrocarbon air combustion at 1 atmosphere 300 Kelvin. So, we have maybe 2000 Kelvin and 300 Kelvin. So, it will give you about a ratio of 7. Okay. So, this tells you that there is considerable acceleration of gas flow across the flame, right. And what sort of flames are we talking about? Are we only talking about flames where you have a tube and in that you have a fuel air mixture, and in that fuel air mixture there is a wave that is propagating? Is this the only thing that we are talking about? Is this the only situation when you get laminar premix flames? Well, premix flames have a tendency to move. That's correct. So this situation is typical. It's very much possible. You have a mixture, you have ignited it, the flame will try to propagate, correct? But can you also have stable premix flames which are not moving? Can we have that? Have we seen any example of that? Again, from previous discussion, have you seen any example of that? Bunsen burner. It can be many other different kinds of burners. It doesn't have to have exactly the same geometry of the Bunsen burner, but you can have a burner where you are sending the fuel air mixture and then you get a flame, right? So this is a stable flame. This is a flame which has been anchored, or you can say, you can call it, this is an anchored flame, you can call it stabilized flame, but this is a flame which is not moving. So very quickly, can you tell me what is the why in this case, a simple minded logic, why in this case the flame moves and why in this other case the flame does not move? Simplest basic reason. You have seen a Bunsen flame. You may not have seen this, but it's easy to imagine. If you take a transparent tube, fill it up with a fuel air mixture, ignite it, it's likely that the flame will move, correct? So why is it that in this case it is moving, but in this case it's anchored? No surface. No surface meaning, what do you mean by that? In the Bunsen flame, no surface meaning exactly, what do you exactly mean by that?
Means the fuel and air is moving till then flame generates. Generating flame at the interface. After that there is no surface.
But is a relative velocity.
Closer I
There the mixture is stationary and flame is moving. Here the mixture itself is moving. That's why.
Yeah. So the flame is okay to sit at one place if you are supplying mixture at a proper rate to it. If you are supplying the mixture at a proper rate to it, then the flame can sit at one place, so it can get stabilized. But if you are not doing that, if it is a quiescent mixture and if you ignited it, then a flame will move, correct? So this much we understand. So we have to now understand, in a few minutes from now, we'll also make an effort to understand what is the relation between the spatial velocity of a flame and the velocity of the gases. Okay. So for example, in this case, flame doesn't have a spatial velocity. Spatial meaning, if I set up a Bunsen flame here, you will not see the flame moving. So in your reference frame, the flame is actually not moving. So the flame doesn't have a spatial velocity, whereas the gases have velocity, correct? The gases are moving because there is a flow. Whereas in this case, at least the unburned mixture is not moving and the flame is actually also moving. So can the gas velocity and the flame velocity, can these be related? Okay. So let's look at that. Please be careful about the notation because I have to make some switches in notations sometimes. So if you are a little mindful, you will be able to figure out what we are talking about. This one, we wrote a VW, but let us call it SS also. SS is spatial speed, right? And let us say in a general sense that this unburned gas moves at SUG. SUG. So, if it is a quiescent mixture, then this value is close to 0, if it is a quiescent mixture. Now, SS minus SUG is something of interest, and we call it an STR, and STR is burning or transformation velocity.
What is the UG?
UG is unburnt gas. UG is unburnt gas. So, it is actually same concept, but just be careful about the notation.
We continue to supply the mixture.
In this case, it is not a quiescent, this is more a general situation when the unburnt mixture is not quiescent. So, its unburnt mixture also has some velocity. So, there is a flame in a moving fluid, you can interpret it in this way. Okay, so, the SUG is non-zero in this situation. The SUG equal to 0 is after all a special case, isn't it? If we say it is a quiescent mixture, then SUG is equal to 0, but that is a special case. We are trying to make it more general.
So, STR should be positive always.
Yeah, so we will come to STR. Whether it is positive or negative, we will come to that later, but first you have to tell me this. SS is what? SS is that wave speed, right? And we can see this one. So, if you have again a transparent tube, and if you are doing an experiment, you will see a glow moving, that is a flame, because the flame has its own radiation, you will be able to see that. So, you will see a flame sort of thing, a surface, a glowing surface move, correct. Imagine that I am doing the experiment, I am holding the tube here, and there is a mixture, and then this flame is moving. So, there is a spatial speed, you can sitting out there, you can see that the flame is moving. So, there is a spatial speed. So, that we are calling SS. And what is SUG? You may not be able to see that directly, but maybe that information is available to you. There is some speed with which the unburnt gas just ahead of the flame is moving, right. Now, SS minus SUG is a quantity of interest. So, we are defining it. We are defining this SS minus SUG, and we are giving it a name. We are calling it a burning or transformation velocity. Okay. So, SS minus SUG is STR. So, SS minus SUG is what actually? Physically?
Velocity of unburned gas with reference to the flame. Velocity of combustion taking place.
Yeah, so it's like this. I think an easy way to understand this will be, think about a unit time. In that unit time, it will move from, the wave will move from here to here, and how much is this? SS, isn't it? And in that unit time, the gas just ahead of the flame will move by a distance SUG, right. So, SS minus SUG is per unit time the distance over which the mixture has been trapped and consumed by the flame, correct. It is like the mixture is moving, it is being chased by the flame. So, mixture has a velocity. Since the mixture has a velocity, the speed of the combustion wave, the spatial speed, which we are calling SS, is with which the flame is moving, but it is not able to catch the entire amount. Some gas since the gas is running ahead of the combustion wave, some gas is escaping that, isn't it? So, Ss minus Sug is proportional to the gas which is getting consumed per unit time by the combustion wave. Okay. So, now if you understand this, you will be able to tell me why it is called a transformation velocity. It is transforming what? Who is transforming what? Unburnt gas is getting transformed to burnt gas by the flame, right. So, S is equal to Ss minus Sug is equal to Str. So, this is transformation velocity. This transformation talks about transforming the unburnt mixture to burnt mixture. Okay.
This shows that for the burning purpose, the Ss has to be higher than Sug.
Yes. So, the difference is what will give you the transformation, right. So, this is transformation velocity, and you can also see that if Sug is 0, and this is what we were assuming few minutes back, quiescent mixture, then Ss is Str, okay, or in our language Vw is in fact that Sl. Okay. So, I am sorry there is a little bit of notational issue, but I still wanted to use Str for this burning velocity, because the word this Tr transformation is nice, because this tells you that this unburnt is getting converted to burnt, whereas in Turns's book he has used Sl for the same thing, to remind ourselves that he is talking about the laminar situation. Okay. So, you have to be little careful with this, but conceptually this is we are talking about the same thing. Okay. So, that is Ss, and what is Str? Str can be also thought about in this kind of a form. So, Str has to do with transformation. Now, Af is the flame area, rho u is the unburnt mixture, and dmu dt is the rate of change of mass of the unburnt mixture. Okay. So, let us see. This equation actually tells you that Af into rho u into Str is dmu dt with a minus sign, correct. So, that makes sense. dmu dt is minus Af rho u Str. Af is the area of the flame, rho u is the unburnt gas density, Str is the transformation velocity. So, Af is actually the same as the if we assume a planar flame moving in a tube, then Af is the same as just the cross sectional area. Of course, that is an assumption. In reality, it does not happen. The flame is never perfectly flat. But this expression can also be used for other kinds of flames. If you have a spherical chamber and then you have a fuel air mixture in it, if you are igniting it and you will get a spherical flame which can propagate, there the area will be 4 pi r square, Af will be 4 pi r square. So, this tells you that the burning velocity has something to do with the consumption of the mixture.
So, what in second case, in case of sphere, R depends on the velocity, or R will change with time.
Yeah, R will change with time. R will change with time. See, we are not saying that this transformation velocity is a constant or anything like that. We are just defining transformation velocity like this. We have to understand transformation velocity, which is the burning velocity, better in different contexts. But this is true that it is related to the consumption of the unburnt mixture, mass of the unburnt mixture. Okay. So, what you were saying in that question is that okay, this area is not going to remain the same for a spherical flame. That is correct. With time the flame will expand, so 4 pi r squared will keep on increasing. Okay, so these are some of the definitions. Now I think we do not have a lot of time today, but let's think about one or two small issues before we close. And the most important issue is the physical aspect of it. I think I mentioned this once, but let me repeat this. We have this flame which is propagating from right to left, correct? What is the mechanism of propagation and what is a flame really? I think I mentioned in the last class probably that a flame is not a set of particular molecules, or it is not a set of particular particles, isn't it? It is not a material body which is moving, it is not like a membrane which is moving through water, correct? So, what did I mean by that? I meant that okay, when the flame is here, then these particles are reacting, they are releasing heat, there are radicals getting produced. Some of the chemical species are actually giving you luminescence which helps you to see the glow of the flame, right. So, a lot of things are happening here, but it is not, I mean this set of particles are not the same set of particles when you see the flame here, correct. Do we understand this? Because I think unless I specifically mention this, there is always a chance that some of you might end up believing it, but that is not correct. It is not like the same set of particles moving from here to there, no, it is a wave. It means that at this time these particles are giving you the reaction, and a slightly later time these other particles are giving you the reaction. This is where the chemical reaction is taking place, correct. So, that is one understanding of a flame which you have to remember. If somebody tells you that is not correct, then you have to convince that person.
How do we know that during that this reaction,
Hmm.
the flame, the radiation which is there, the temperature which is there, that is in the visible range, then only we can see it. There may be a burning that we cannot see it, but burning is there.
Yeah, that is a good point. Actually, the most intense region where chemical reaction is taking place will give you these chemical species which will give you radiation which your eyes can catch, okay. But around that there may be some region where reaction is also taking place, but the temperatures are not that high or the chemical species are not that active in the visible region. So, you may not see all the radiation coming from all reaction that is taking place, okay. But it is true that the visible region that you are seeing, that is very close to where the maximum reaction is taking place, okay. There are exceptions of course. For example, if you have hydrogen combustion, it is more like an invisible flame, okay, but we are not talking about that. In general, what I said is correct. Now, just before we close, how does the flame move? Okay, it is good to write equations, and I keep telling you that okay, this tube with mixture, flame propagating from right to left, I mean how does it propagate? You are not telling it to propagate, right? How does it know that it has to move, and why is it moving? What is it trying to do? Concentration difference between the burnt gas and the unburnt gas, okay. Concentration of what? Which species? Product. So, the products are here, the products are here if you are talking about this flame, and you have reactants here. So, the concentration of products are high behind the flame, and what is the concentration of products at the flame? At the flame there will also be concentration, okay, but ahead of the flame in the reactant region only reactants. But the reactant concentration is good in the reactant region and the unburnt region, but the reactant concentration is in fact close to 0 in the flame, because that is where reactants are getting consumed and products are getting produced, fine. So, probably you are talking about that concentration difference. Okay. So, it is partially correct in the sense that the flame is moving because it is getting reactants ahead of it and it is trying to consume it, correct. It has consumed some reactants here, ahead of it there is some more reactants. So, it tries to consume that, so it will move and consume. But then that does not fully answer my question, is not it? How does it move? I am talking about the mechanism. How does it move?
So temperature of this joining fuel will get means it will get raised to a boiling point. So
Okay.
Temperature, pressure, and all those things. It is getting ready for that combustible range.
Yes, that is correct. Not exactly pressure, because pressure is almost the same as we have been saying, but if I understand you correctly, what you are saying is if the flame is here, then the zone just ahead of it is still not burning, but some preliminary reactions may have started there and it has already gotten heated up. Pressure may not have changed, again pressure may not have changed, but the temperature is probably rising in that region. Okay. So, that means an instant later this will actually start burning vigorously, reaction rate will increase there. At this instant of time when the flame is here the reactions are slow, but very soon, within a few milliseconds, this will also catch fire, in the sense that the reaction rates will go up. And then when the flame is here, then the zone ahead of it will similarly again catch fire. But how is the heating taking place? Yes, so by conduction and radiation, and there is a huge temperature gradient there. The flame is 2000 and the mixture ahead of it is more like 300, 400, 500, whatever. It has got heated to some extent, but basic unburnt temperature is 300, let us say, in the unburnt mixture. The flame is at 2000, so there is a huge temperature gradient. Okay, and that temperature gradient will push heat by conduction. There will be some effect of radiation also. So, the mixture gets heated up and the mixture will get to try to react. Apart from that heating, there is also chemical species, and some intermediate chemical species, very active chemical species, which will diffuse from the flame to the zone ahead of it. All right. So, you are giving some chemical, the flame is preparing its path. So, the flame is here, it gives heat, it gives active chemical species, makes sure that this ignites, and once this ignites, it does the same thing here, then this moves like this. This is the picture. Okay. So, this picture you need to keep in mind as a physical model of flame. This is a simple thing that you remember, because otherwise if you do not remember this, then we will get lost in equations sometimes, which I do not want to happen. Okay. So, we will stop here. Thank you.